Here's a question for you. How much protein do we need in our diet? And is too much protein bad for us? Here's what the latest science says. So up until recently, there was no direct study to try and assess if the amount of protein you eat has a direct effect on your mortality and your longevity. Until this year, a big study came out of Southern California, the University of Southern California, and they tested over 6,000 people and they followed them up over an 18-year period. And what they did is they categorized them into 3 different groups. So they had people who got 20% of their calories from protein. And then in the middle group, they had people who had between 10 and 19% of their calories from protein, and then a lower group that was below 10% of their calories from protein. So they compared these 3 groups over time, and they tested them for cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and overall longevity, so how long they actually lived for. Now, just a bit of background first. It's been known for some time that people who ate a high protein diet had an elevated level of a factor in their blood called IGF-1. That's insulin-like growth factor. And it's really responsible for a lot of metabolic effects and growth when you're younger. The problem here is the higher this level, the more incidence there is of cancer, diabetes, etc. So there's been that association before, but no studies have really looked at the effect of this long term and assessed the effect on mortality. So just to reiterate there, so those people who eat more protein tend to have more of this IGF-1, and people who eat less protein have a lower amount of IGF-1, and a lower amount of IGF-1 is good. And they also looked at where this protein came from. Did it come from animal sources or plant sources? And that's pretty important. So what did the study show? So in a nutshell, it showed that eating more protein was bad for you. And to put that into some perspective, in the high protein group had overall a 75% increase in mortality. So not far off double the mortality of those who are on a low protein diet. So there's an effect. And also there was a 4-fold increase in cancer cases. And these were in people up to 65 years old. So it looks like eating too much protein is not good for you. It reduces your incidence of cancer, and it also overall increases your chances of dying young. And what also happened is it also increased by 5-fold, I think, the incidence of diabetes, although the risk was very small. But something weird happened. What happened is, for those people who are over 65, the reverse was true. So once you hit 65, it showed that you should actually increase your protein intake, and that would reduce the cancer and overall mortality. So it's quite a strange finding. So before 65, you should reduce or limit your protein, but then after 65, you should increase it. So that was a summary of the finding. Increasing age along the bottom, and then across the top here, we've got the predicted time till death using the various models that they use. But what's interesting here, at 50 years old, this long dashed line is the low protein, those on the low protein diet. And their predicted time of death is another 35 years, perhaps something along that at the age of 50 of longevity. But those who ate the high protein diet, which is this single line here, this long uninterrupted line, they died about approximately 10 years earlier. So that is a big difference in all-cause mortality. So that makes me think that in this case, reducing your protein might be worth it. But what also happens here, you can see, is that as your age increases, so across here, you get older, or whoever we get older, this difference declines. And at about 70 years or 65, there's a crossover here where those people on the high protein diet actually live for longer than on the low protein diet. But the difference, it has to be said, is much smaller here. So it does appear that around middle age, around the 50-year mark and onwards, maybe till about 60, there's a significant difference here, or a worthwhile difference in altering your protein intake. Here they looked at cancer, and at 50 years old, the predicted years you'd have left if you were a low protein would be another 55 years. Now obviously you wouldn't live that long because you'd die of something else, but it's just a relative risk that you would get cancer. So at 50, if you're on a low protein intake, your predicted time to death is very long, and there's a significant and large difference between those who are on a high protein diet. So again, that's 40, 50, 57, what's that, 17-year difference. So that again is an eye-opener, and that would probably, at least at this age, around 50, make you consider having a lower protein intake. And again, the relative difference reduces as you get older, and there's that crossover again at about 65, where it looks like you should eat actually more protein to increase your health and longevity. It is, they also followed up this with animal models, with a mouse experiment, and it sort of mirrored what they found or expected to find in people. So what does that actually mean in real life? So what these authors recommend is that we eat about 0.7 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. So I'm about 80 kilograms, so that's 67 grams of protein that I should eat a day. But again, what does that mean? So if you have to look on food labels. So I had a quick look online, and for most meats, on average, beef, pork, chicken, there is a variation, but they're around 26 grams of protein per 100 grams. So that means I could eat about 250 grams of meat a day. But don't forget, that's all protein, so I'd have to get I'd also have to include milk, nuts. Everything has some protein in, but milk, nuts, meat has a higher amount, eggs. So in the real world, that would for me mean maybe 2 sausages, a chicken breast, a pork chop, maybe 2 small pork chops a day. So it's actually not that bad. There was one other really important finding here, and that is if the proteins came from plants, from legumes or nuts, then that mortality was mostly wiped off. So what that means is protein from plants isn't bad, but protein from animals is. There seems to be here's the thing, science doesn't always tell you what you want to hear, but it just gives you the guidelines, so it's up to you to act on it if you want. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind, is that this study, although it was one of the first, and it's quite large, it has got its flaws as well. So the flaws are this, that it was a questionnaire based. It's an association study. So what that means is people filled out a questionnaire to describe what they ate, and then they were followed for 18 years. And that's been shown to be, not the best. People lie. People lie when they fill out questionnaires. And also, although this follow-up lasted for 18 years, they only filled out the questionnaire once. So that's not, although they justified it, it's really not a good way to follow up people just based on one questionnaire over 18 years. So that's the confounder. The other thing is that they didn't really look, as far as I can tell, at the different types of meat. So was that processed meats or fresh meats? There's a lot of evidence now that it's the processed meat that's particularly bad for us, and I'm not sure, but it doesn't look like they separated those particularly well. And the other thing is the numbers. For an epidemiological study, the numbers are pretty small. 6,000 might sound a lot, but in actual fact, that's quite a small number, and I think they need more than that. But it's still interesting. It's still, and it's food for thought. There's emerging information that too much protein, particularly from red meat, is not particularly good for us. And also, if we should all up our vegetable intake or get our protein from vegetable sources. And this isn't new, this is old information, but this is the first time that they've actually shown the link with mortality. So here's the thing, what do I think about this paper? It makes me realise again that science doesn't always tell you what you want to hear, but what it does is it tells you the reality. A good paper will tell you the reality, and if a paper's wrong and it gives you the wrong information, then it's self-correcting. So other researchers will come along and say, oh, I don't think that's true. I think we should reassess this information. But the thing about protein is it's been building up, and all of the information's in the same direction, that too much protein is probably not a good thing for us. So yeah, I like a steak as much as the next guy. So, but yeah, maybe I'll reduce the amount of protein, or consider reducing the amount of protein I eat, or trying to get that from vegetables. The other thing is, perhaps if you're a bodybuilder, or you're someone who requires a lot of protein, or you just eat a lot of protein, maybe you should consider getting that from other sources, or at least doing that calculation, the 0.7 to 0.8 grams per kilogram, and seeing where you might be able to modify that. And if you're over 65, then increase your protein. That's good news, at least. So don't forget, I'll put the summary sheet at the end, just to summarize all these facts that were found, and also the paper, the link to the papers below. Because as always, advice without evidence, just an opinion. Thanks for watching.